Every night while you sleep, your liver punches in for its most critical shift. It detoxifies, it regenerates, it manages your cholesterol, processes your hormones, filters your blood, rebuilds damaged cells, and it does all of this between roughly 10 p.m. and 2 a.m., the window when hepatic repair activity hits its biological peak. Here's what the system never told you. There is a 1 to 2 hour window before you go to sleep where specific foods, not supplements, not prescriptions, not anything expensive, can directly determine how well that repair cycle runs. The research on this is published, it's peer-reviewed, and your doctor almost certainly has never brought it up. I'm Dr. Harris. I've spent over 15 years in clinical practice, and in that time I've watched patients do everything right. Take their medications, follow the dietary guidelines, get their annual labs, while their liver enzymes kept creeping upward and their metabolic health kept declining. The standard 10-minute appointment doesn't leave room for this kind of conversation. That's not your doctor's fault. It's a structural problem in the system. But the information gap is your problem. And closing it starts here. As always, what I'm sharing today is educational, based on published research. If you're taking medication or have a diagnosed condition, have a conversation with your doctor before making changes, especially around the blood-thinning interactions I'll cover later. What I'm going to walk you through is the science of hepatic chronobiology, the field that studies how your liver operates on a time-based cycle, combined with clinical trial data showing that specific nutrients consumed at the right time produce measurable improvements in liver function markers, the kind of improvements that show up in your blood work, not in weeks of perfect dieting, not with a prescription, with foods that cost less than a cup of coffee per day. If your doctor has looked at your labs and said your enzymes are slightly elevated and sent you home without a plan, this is the plan that the research supports. And if your labs look normal but you're over 45, carrying weight around the middle, or just feel like your body isn't recovering the way it used to, stay with me, because the standard liver panel misses more than it catches. Subscribe if you want access to this level of information on a regular basis. I publish specifically because these conversations should be happening in clinical appointments, and they're not. Here's what the conventional medical system gets systematically wrong about liver health. It treats the liver like a passive filter rather than a metabolically active organ that operates on a circadian schedule. The standard approach to elevated liver enzymes is to run the basic panel: ALT, AST, alkaline phosphatase, bilirubin. Note whether you're in or out of range, and either refer you to a specialist if it's serious or tell you to cut back on alcohol and come back in a year if it's not. That's it. That is the full protocol for the majority of patients in primary care. What this approach doesn't address is the mechanism. Why are the enzymes elevated in the first place? What is driving the cellular damage that causes liver cells to leak those enzymes into the bloodstream? And critically, what is happening inside the liver during the hours you're asleep that determines whether early damage reverses or progresses? The conventional answer to that last question is nothing. Sleep, wake up, repeat. The liver takes care of itself. That's the implicit assumption baked into every dietary guideline and every standard of care protocol I've seen. The research tells a completely different story. A 2019 review by Reinke and Asher, published in the Journal of Hepatology, consolidated years of mechanistic research into what is now a well-established finding. The liver has its own autonomous circadian clock. It is governed by a set of clock genes, BMAL1, clock, CRY1, PR2, that operate independently from the brain's central circadian pacemaker in the suprachiasmatic nucleus. What this means practically is that the liver runs its own timed program of metabolic activity, and that program has a very specific nocturnal peak. During those hours between roughly 10 p.m. and 2 a.m., the liver ramps up gluconeogenesis, bile acid synthesis, and, most importantly for what we're discussing, beta oxidation, which is the cellular process by which fat is broken down inside liver cells. Phase 2 detoxification enzymes are also at their most active during this window. Autophagy, the cellular cleanup mechanism where damaged organelles and misfolded proteins get tagged and recycled, is significantly elevated during the same period. The system ignores this entirely when it comes to nutritional timing. You are never told to think about what you eat in the hour before bed in relation to your liver function, because the conventional framework doesn't include hepatic chronobiology. The practical implication of this research, however, is not abstract. If specific bioactive compounds can enhance or support those nocturnal processes when they're delivered at the right time, during that pre-sleep window, then the timing of what you consume before bed is not a trivial detail. It is potentially the most important nutritional variable for liver health that no guideline is measuring. That is the gap the research is filling. and it's a gap worth understanding in detail. Let's go through the studies, because this is where the argument becomes concrete. The first study I want to walk you through looked specifically at ginger and its effect on liver enzymes and lipid profiles in people with non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. This was a randomized, double-blind, placebo-controlled trial, the gold standard of clinical evidence, conducted by Rafi and colleagues and published in the International Journal of Preventive Medicine in 2020. The sample was N46, confirmed NAFLD patients, followed over 12 weeks. The intervention was straightforward, 2 grams per day of ginger powder versus placebo. The results were specific and measurable. The ginger group showed a 15.7% reduction in ALT, that's alanine aminotransferase, the primary liver damage marker, a 14.3% reduction in AST, and a 12.8% reduction in serum triglycerides compared to placebo. No medication, no caloric restriction protocol on top of it, just 2 grams of ginger daily for 12 weeks. The limitation here is real. N46 is a small sample, and this was a single-center trial. The finding needs replication in larger populations, and that work is ongoing. But the mechanism behind this effect is not speculative. Ginger's active compounds, primarily 6-gingerol and shogal, are known inhibitors of NF-κB, which is the master regulator of inflammatory signaling in the liver. NF-κB activation is one of the primary drivers of hepatocellular damage in fatty liver disease. Blocking that pathway with a food-derived compound and seeing it show up in enzyme levels is mechanistically coherent, not coincidental. What the system ignores about this study: a medication prescribed for elevated ALT costs between $50 and $200 per month depending on your insurance and your pharmacy. 2 grams of ginger powder, the dose used in this trial, costs roughly $3 a month. The clinical evidence in this study is comparable to what we typically require before recommending an intervention. The reason it doesn't make it into standard care has nothing to do with the science. The second study moves from a single food to a systematic review of the most extensively studied hepatoprotective compound in the current literature. Mansour Ghaneh and colleagues published a meta-analysis in Complementary Therapies in Medicine in 2019, pulling together 8 randomized controlled trials with a combined N5-20, all focused on curcumin supplementation in NAFLD patients. Duration across the included trials ranged from 8 to 24 weeks. Curcumin doses ranged from 500 to 3,000 milligrams per day. The aggregate findings across those 8 trials were striking. Curcumin reduced ALT by an average of 29%, reduced AST by 24%, and showed measurable reduction in hepatic fat accumulation assessed by ultrasound in 5 out of 6 studies that measured it. That's not one trial. That's a consistent signal across multiple independent research groups with multiple dose ranges over varying time frames. The critical limitation here is bioavailability. Curcumin on its own is poorly absorbed. The compound is lipophilic and metabolized quickly in the gut before meaningful concentrations reach the liver. The research is clear on the solution. Piperine, the active compound in black pepper, inhibits the enzyme responsible for curcumin's rapid metabolism and increases its bioavailability by up to 2,000% according to pharmacokinetic studies. This is why the preparation matters. A pinch of black pepper alongside turmeric is not a folk remedy. It is the delivery mechanism that makes the clinical evidence applicable to real-world consumption. The Harris angle here is straightforward. Obeticholic acid, one of the leading NASH drugs currently in development, works partly through farnesoid X receptor modulation, which overlaps mechanistically with some of curcumin's effects on hepatic lipid metabolism. That drug costs thousands of dollars per year. Curcumin with piperine costs approximately $15 a month. The compound cannot be patented, which means there is no financial incentive to run the large-scale trials that would get it into clinical guidelines. The research that exists is being done primarily by academic investigators without pharmaceutical backing. That is why it stays in the journals instead of making it into your doctor's recommendations. The researchers who built the mechanistic case for why these compounds work at night rather than just at any time published their key work in the Journal of Hepatology in 2019. Reinke and Asher's review established what has since been corroborated by multiple follow-up studies. The liver's peak metabolic activity during the nocturnal window means that bioactive compounds delivered in the 1 to 2 hours before sleep have a fundamentally different hepatic impact than the same compounds taken in the morning. This isn't a marginal difference in absorption kinetics. It is a question of whether the compound arrives when the relevant enzymatic machinery is active and operating at full capacity, or whether it arrives when those systems are in a comparatively quiescent state. The conventional system never incorporated this into dietary advice because the conventional system doesn't counsel patients on nutrient timing in relation to organ-specific circadian rhythms. That's not a criticism, it's a structural observation. A 10-minute appointment focused on your blood pressure, your cholesterol panel, and your HbA1c does not have room for hepatic chronobiology. But the absence of that conversation is not the same as the absence of the science. The fourth study I want to cover focused specifically on walnuts, published by Somi and colleagues in Hepatitis Monthly in 2014. This was an RCT with N100 NAFLD patients, 12 weeks of follow-up, comparing 28 grams of walnuts per day, a small handful, against a control group. The walnut group showed a 22.7% reduction in ALT and a 20.2% reduction in AST. Lipid profiles improved. The limitation is the same as with the ginger trial: single center, moderate sample size, needs replication in larger populations. What makes walnuts specifically relevant to the nocturnal timing angle, and this is what makes this food particularly well suited to pre-sleep consumption, is the compound profile. Walnuts are one of the few food sources that contain measurable melatonin. Not enough melatonin to function as a sleep aid, but enough to act as a hepatic signaling molecule during the nocturnal repair window. They also contain alpha-linolenic acid, which is the plant-based omega-3 precursor with documented anti-fibrotic activity in hepatic tissue. And they contain L-glutathione and other polyphenols with direct antioxidant activity in liver cells. You're not getting one hepatoprotective mechanism when you eat a handful of walnuts before bed. You're getting 3 converging mechanisms delivered at the precise time your liver is most metabolically active. That combination is not an accident of food composition. It is the reason this particular food is one of the strongest candidates for pre-sleep hepatic support in the current evidence base. The fifth line of evidence comes from a different direction and addresses a nutrient that has almost completely disappeared from the modern Western diet. Wheeler and colleagues published foundational work in the Journal of Nutrition, with follow-up studies appearing in Shock and Hepatology, establishing the hepatoprotective mechanism of dietary glycine. Glycine is a non-essential amino acid, meaning your body can synthesize it, but it is also conditionally essential under conditions of metabolic stress, which is precisely the situation in a liver dealing with elevated fat accumulation or chronic low-grade inflammation. The studies found that dietary glycine inhibits the activation of Kupffer cells, the resident macrophages of the liver, the immune cells that live permanently inside hepatic tissue, reducing markers of hepatic injury by 30 to 50% in the study models. The limitation here is that the most mechanistically rigorous evidence comes from animal models, and the human interventional data, while consistent in direction, is thinner than we'd like. The mechanism, though, is well established. Kupffer cells have glycine-gated chloride channels. When glycine binds those channels, the cell hyperpolarizes and becomes unable to release pro-inflammatory cytokines, including TNF-alpha and IL-1 beta, 2 of the primary drivers of hepatocellular damage in fatty liver disease. The Kupffer cell is still there. It hasn't been suppressed, it's just been brought back to a proportional response instead of a chronically activated one. The glycine story leads to a food category that nutrition has almost entirely abandoned: collagen and gelatin. These are the highest dietary sources of glycine available, and they've been replaced in the modern diet first by lean protein emphasis and then by processed food consumption. The average Western diet is severely glycine deficient relative to what's needed to keep Kupffer cell activation in check. Getting 5 to 10 grams of glycine from collagen peptides or gelatin in the pre-sleep window, when Kupffer cell-mediated inflammation is being driven by the free fatty acid flux that peaks in the late evening, is a direct mechanistic intervention that costs almost nothing and that no doctor is recommending. Now let's go to the biology, because understanding what these compounds are actually doing inside your liver at night changes how you think about the entire nocturnal window. The first mechanism is what I call the hepatic night shift, the circadian-controlled activation of repair and detoxification processes that distinguishes nocturnal liver function from daytime liver function. During the hours you're asleep, your liver activates phase 2 detoxification enzymes, including glutathione S transferase and UDP glucuronosyl transferase, that conjugate toxic metabolites and prepare them for excretion. Autophagy peaks during this window, clearing damaged mitochondria, misfolded proteins, and lipid droplet accumulation that has built up during the day. Beta oxidation, the process of burning fat inside liver cells, which is the opposite of the fat accumulation that defines fatty liver disease, is highest during the nocturnal phase. Think about it this way. Your liver has a cleaning crew that works the night shift. During the day, it's managing incoming traffic, processing nutrients from meals, producing bile, regulating blood glucose. At night, when the traffic slows, the cleaning crew comes out. They fix the damage, clear the debris, and prepare the organ for the next day. If you show up at the start of that shift and hand them the right materials, the molecular substrates they need to run those repair processes at full capacity, the shift goes better. If you show up with nothing, or worse, with things that create more work for them, the damage from the day doesn't get fully addressed. The BMAL1 and clock genes coordinate this entire program. Research published after Ranke and Asher's review has shown that disruption of hepatic BMAL1 expression, which happens in people with metabolic syndrome and increases with age, directly impairs the nocturnal detoxification window. One of the mechanisms by which polyphenols like those in walnuts and turmeric appear to support liver function is by maintaining BMAL1 expression and protecting the integrity of the hepatic clock. This is not the mechanism listed on any nutritional supplement label. It's the mechanism in the journals. The second mechanism is Kupffer cell hyperactivation, the process by which your liver's immune cells shift from protective to damaging, and the specific pathway through which glycine interrupts that shift. Kupffer cells make up roughly 15% of the total cell population in the liver. Their job is surveillance, identifying and eliminating pathogens, cellular debris, and toxic compounds that arrive from the gut via the portal circulation. In a healthy liver, this is a balanced, proportional response. In a metabolically stressed liver, one dealing with elevated free fatty acids, elevated endotoxin from gut dysbiosis, or elevated glucose flux, Kupffer cells become chronically activated. They start releasing inflammatory cytokines continuously, not just in response to specific threats. That chronic inflammatory state is the driver of progression from simple fatty liver to non-alcoholic steatohepatitis, which is the stage where fibrosis begins. Think of Kupffer cells as security guards at a facility that has started getting a lot of false alarms. At some point, the guards stop distinguishing between real threats and noise. They're in permanent high alert mode. The facility suffers not because of the original threats, but because the security response itself has become the problem. Glycine doesn't eliminate the guards. It doesn't suppress the immune function. It literally flips a molecular switch, those glycine-gated chloride channels, that brings the guards back to a calibrated response instead of a hair-trigger one. That is a mechanistically precise intervention that no dietary guideline currently recommends. The third mechanism is SREBP1C inhibition, and this is the one that directly addresses fat accumulation in the liver, which is the core pathology in fatty liver disease. SREBP1C stands for sterile regulatory element binding protein 1C, and it is the master transcription factor that controls hepatic lipogenesis. In simple terms, it is the switch in your liver's nucleus that, when activated, turns on the genes responsible for converting excess glucose and fructose into fat and storing that fat inside liver cells. When SREBP1C is running hot, which happens in states of hyperinsulinemia, which is extremely common in adults over 45 who carry abdominal weight, the liver produces fat faster than it can export or oxidize it. That's how fatty liver develops and progresses. Curcumin directly inhibits SREBP1C. The mechanism involves curcumin's interaction with the protein's DNA binding domain, reducing its translocation from the endoplasmic reticulum to the nucleus, and thereby reducing the transcriptional activation of lipogenic genes. To put it in plain terms, curcumin reaches into the liver's fat production control panel and turns down the dial. The medications being developed to do the same thing pharmacologically, at thousands of dollars per year, are working on overlapping targets. Curcumin costs $15 a month and has a safety profile that spans decades of human consumption. The reason this isn't in the clinical guidelines has nothing to do with the mechanism. The mechanism is published. The reason is that there is no financial architecture in conventional medicine that incentivizes studying and recommending a compound that cannot be patented and whose supply chain you cannot control. That's not conspiracy. That's how drug development economics work. The fourth mechanism addresses what happens when hepatic circadian function starts to break down with age, and this is the one that is most relevant specifically to the 45 to 65 age group, a phenomenon called circadian metabolic drift. where the amplitude of the liver's clock gene oscillations decreases, has been documented as a consistent feature of aging and metabolic syndrome. What this means practically is that the nocturnal repair window becomes less robust as you get older. The cleaning crew still shows up, but they're working shorter hours with less equipment. The delta between peak nocturnal liver function and daytime function narrows. This is one of the reasons that the same lifestyle factors that might have been metabolically tolerable at 35 become problematic at 50, not because anything dramatic changed, but because the liver's nightly reset is running at a lower amplitude. Polyphenols, particularly the L-gitannins in walnuts and the curcuminoids in turmeric, have been shown in multiple in vitro and animal studies to upregulate BML1 expression and restore circadian amplitude in hepatic tissue. The human interventional data on this specific mechanism is still developing, and I want to be honest about that. The signal is consistent, but the clinical evidence in humans is not yet at the level where I would say the mechanism is fully confirmed. What we have is strong mechanistic evidence, consistent preclinical results, and clinical trial data showing outcomes, the enzyme reductions, the ultrasound improvements that are consistent with what you'd predict if the mechanism were active. That's a solid evidential case, even if it's not a closed one. What I can say with confidence is this: the interaction between polyphenol consumption, hepatic circadian biology, and the nocturnal repair window is the most underappreciated area in preventive liver medicine right now. It's not on your doctor's radar. It should be. You've got the evidence. You understand the biology. Now the part that actually matters, what you do with this information starting tonight. The core of the protocol is simple, and it's built around that 1 to 2 hour pre-sleep window. Everything I'm going to describe has specific mechanistic rationale tied directly to the biology we just covered, and every component has clinical or mechanistic evidence behind it. Nothing here is speculation. The first priority is walnuts, 28 grams. That's one small handful, about a quarter cup. This is the dose from the SOMI trial that produced the 22.7% ALT reduction and the 20.2% AST reduction over 12 weeks. The timing is specifically pre-sleep for the reasons we covered. Melatonin as a hepatic circadian signal, alpha-linolenic acid as an anti-fibrotic substrate arriving during beta oxidation's peak window, and polyphenols for antioxidant activity and BML1 support during the nocturnal repair phase. The common mistake with walnuts is overeating them. More is not better here. 60 grams or more becomes calorically significant and starts to work against the metabolic goals. 28 grams, one small handful. That's the evidence-based dose. What the system says instead: walnuts are a healthy snack. Eat them whenever. The evidence suggests the timing is a critical variable, not an afterthought. The second priority is ginger, specifically as a warm tea without sugar, prepared from 1 to 2 grams of fresh or powdered ginger. This is how you hit the RAFI trial dose, 2 grams, in a form that is easily digestible in the pre-sleep window without adding calories that would blunt the nocturnal fat oxidation process. The NF-κB inhibition mechanism means you're directly interrupting the inflammatory cascade that elevates liver enzymes. Taking it warm matters less mechanistically than taking it close to sleep, but the warm preparation aids in settling gastric activity before bed, which has its own indirect benefits for liver detoxification. A less active gut means less endotoxin arriving through the portal circulation during the nocturnal window. One safety note here: at the doses used in the RAFI trial, 2 grams per day, ginger's interaction with blood-thinning medications like warfarin and high-dose aspirin is minimal but real. If you're on anticoagulation therapy, check with your doctor before making this a daily practice. The third priority is turmeric with black pepper. 1 teaspoon of turmeric powder combined with a pinch of black pepper in warm liquid. This can be combined with a small amount of warm milk, regular or plant-based, delivers curcuminoids in a bioavailable form during the window when SREBP1C activity is at its most suppressible. The piperine in the black pepper is not optional. Without it, the curcumin's systemic bioavailability drops dramatically, and you're not replicating the Mansour-Ghanem meta-analysis dosing in any meaningful way. A fat source, even a small one, like the fat naturally present in dairy or in the walnuts, further enhances curcumin absorption since it is lipophilic. The curcumin safety consideration worth noting: at culinary doses, 1 teaspoon of turmeric, the antiplatelet effect is negligible. At supplemental doses above 3 grams per day of isolated curcumin, the platelet aggregation inhibition becomes clinically relevant, particularly in people on anticoagulants. Stay at culinary doses with this protocol and you're in safe territory for the vast majority of people. The fourth priority is collagen peptides or plain gelatin, 5 to 10 grams dissolved in warm liquid. This is your glycine delivery mechanism. 5 to 10 grams of collagen peptides contains roughly 1.5 to 3 grams of glycine, which is the dose range that has been used in mechanistic studies on Kupffer cell inhibition. The goal is to get glycine arriving in the portal circulation during the early nocturnal window, when free fatty acid flux from adipose tissue is at its peak and Kupffer cell activation risk is highest. This is the intervention with the least clinical trial evidence in humans. The mechanistic case is strong, the animal data is robust, but we don't have a clean human RCT at the dose and timing I'm describing. The safety profile of glycine is excellent, the cost is negligible, the mechanistic rationale is solid. I include it in the protocol with that level of certainty and no more. Now the biomarkers, because if you're going to do this, you should be able to measure it. The first thing to ask for at your next appointment is a complete liver function panel with ALT and AST individually reported. Not just liver enzymes normal, you want the numbers. Your optimal ALT is not just below the lab's upper reference range, which is typically around 40 to 56 UL for men depending on the lab. Research on metabolic risk suggests that ALT above 19 UL in women and above 30 UL in men correlates with meaningful increases in metabolic liver disease risk even within the normal range. Ask what your number is, not just whether it's flagged. The second marker to request is GGT, gamma-glutamyl transferase. This is included in many comprehensive metabolic panels but is often not flagged unless it's significantly elevated, and it is one of the most sensitive markers of oxidative stress in liver tissue. A GGT trending down over the course of following this protocol is one of the clearest signals that the nocturnal antioxidant mechanisms are working. The third marker that provides the most information about what's actually happening structurally in your liver is a liver ultrasound. This is not routinely ordered in preventive care. You'll need to ask for it or ask for a referral if your primary care physician won't order it directly. The ultrasound can detect hepatic steatosis, fat accumulation, at levels that are metabolically significant, but that produce no change in enzyme levels. The Mansour-Ghanai meta-analysis showed ultrasound-measured fat reduction in 5 out of 6 studies. If you're going to track the structural impact of this protocol, this is how you do it. One more thing before the timeline, and this comes from 15 years of watching patients implement protocols and then undermine them with one consistent pattern. The nocturnal window works in the direction of repair when the liver isn't simultaneously managing an acute metabolic load. If you're eating a large meal within 2 hours of bed, particularly a high carbohydrate or high fructose meal, you are creating a competing demand on the liver's nocturnal resources. The liver can't run its repair and detoxification program at full capacity while it's managing an insulin spike and a glucose flux. This is not an argument for not eating at night. It's an argument for the pre-sleep protocol being your last significant nutritional input, a small targeted set of compounds, not the tail end of a large meal. Keep the total caloric load of this protocol under 250 calories. Walnuts, ginger tea, turmeric and warm milk, collagen powder, done. That's the window. People who add the collagen to the turmeric milk, add the walnuts on the side, and make the ginger tea their last beverage of the night report the highest compliance because it becomes a routine rather than an intervention. That's the behavioral architecture that makes this sustainable past the first 2 weeks. The timeline, based on the study data and not on promises, in the first 1 to 2 weeks, the most commonly noticed change is sleep quality. The walnut's melatonin content, while not pharmacologically significant as a sleep aid, contributes to the circadian signaling environment in which the liver is operating. A number of patients report more restorative sleep, and the research on glycine and collagen is consistent with this. Glycine has well-documented effects on sleep architecture, specifically on slow-wave sleep, which is the stage most associated with physical recovery and hepatic repair. In the first month to 6 weeks, if your liver enzymes were elevated going in, you should start seeing movement. The Rafi Ginger trial showed statistically significant changes by week 8. The Somi Walnut trial showed significant ALT changes at 12 weeks. If you're getting a blood draw at the 1-month mark, don't be discouraged if the numbers haven't moved dramatically. The trajectory matters more than any single time point. At the 2 to 3 month mark, this is where the full picture becomes visible. The meta-analysis showing 29% average ALT reduction with curcumin used trials running 8 to 24 weeks. The walnut data at 12 weeks showed 22.7% ALT reduction. If you are following this protocol consistently and you're not seeing any movement in your liver markers at the 12-week point, two things are worth evaluating. 1. The dose and preparation. Are you using black pepper with the turmeric? Is the collagen in a form that's fully dissolved and absorbed? 2. The competing factors. Alcohol, fructose, and ultra-processed food consumption create a metabolic load that can outrun what any food-based protocol can counteract. This protocol is not a rescue intervention for an otherwise unrestricted diet. Here's what this comes down to. The conventional approach to liver health is reactive. You wait for the enzymes to elevate. You wait for the ultrasound to show significant steatosis. You wait for symptoms, which in most people don't appear until the disease is already moderate to advanced. The system is built around that reactive model because that's when the diagnostic codes apply and the reimbursement flows. The research on hepatic chronobiology and food-derived hepatoprotective compounds points towards something different. A proactive model where you're actively supporting the liver's nightly repair cycle with the specific nutrients that the evidence shows make a difference, not with a medication, not with a 200 per month supplement stack, with a handful of walnuts, a cup of ginger tea, a teaspoon of turmeric with black pepper and warm milk, and 5 grams of collagen powder. The total cost is under $5 a day. The mechanistic rationale is published in peer-reviewed journals, and nobody in your healthcare system has told you about it because there's no financial architecture that incentivizes them to. You've been going to appointments for years, getting panels done, following the recommendations, and if your liver health has been trending in the wrong direction anyway, it's not because you failed, it's because the protocol you were given was incomplete. This is the part that was missing. The information I've shared today comes from published peer-reviewed research, Rafi et al. 2020, Mansour Ghanay et al. 2019, Reinke and Asher 2019, Somi et al. 2014, Wheeler et al., spanning multiple journals. None of it is fringe science. All of it is accessible to anyone willing to read the journals. The gap between what the research shows and what shows up in clinical recommendations is not a gap in the science, it's a gap in the translation. That's what this channel exists to close. Leave in the comments what your doctor has told you about your liver health and whether any of what I covered today matches or contradicts that conversation. I read all of them. It's exactly the kind of feedback that shapes what I research next. Dr. Harris, see you in the next one.